Alrighty, so we are in the final lesson of this section, and all that's left is for us to implement so that when we click, so this is the demo app, so that when we click on one of these recipes, that it takes us to a new view controller where we present a larger image of the food, have the title here, and then the instructions displayed here. Okay, so let's get cracking. First thing we're going to need is a new view controller. So I'm going to open up our object library here and search for a view controller and just drop that in right here. And we're going to need to be segueing from this recipes selection VC to our new view controller. So I'm going to control, click, and drag, let go, and say show. Okay, so now we have a segue going from our recipe selection VC to our new generic view controller. And let's go ahead and give our segue a identifier right now. And let's name that to recipe selection. Okay. Now we have our view controller here in storyboard, but it's not hooked up to any viewcontroller.swift file. So we need to create a new controller. So I'm going to right click on controller and say new file. This is going to be a Cocoa Touch class. I'm going to say next, and we need to find a UI view controller subclass, and we'll give it a name, and we'll call this RecipeDetailVC. And we'll say next and create. All right, so now we have our RecipeDetailVC file here. Let's go ahead and hook it up to our view controller here in storyboard. So select it, make sure you have view controller selected, and come over here to our custom class and say RecipeDetailVC. There we go. So now this view controller and the viewcontroller.swift file is hooked up, or I should say the RecipeDetailVC.swift file. Okay, so let's check out our demo again, see what we need over in this final view. It looks like we have an image up here, nice and big. We have a label here for the title, and then another label here for the instructions. Okay, so let's start with our image. I'm going to open our object library, search for image, and drop in an image view. I'm going to put this right up in the corner and just kind of drag this down and over. And then let's go ahead and pin it. Let's get its constraints. So down here we have our add new constraints. And let's go ahead and pin it 0 from the left, top, and right. And then we're going to give it a height of 225. I'm going to say add those 4 constraints. While we're here, before we forget, let's change the content mode to aspect fill. And we can give this a placeholder image, just select image, and let's do a salad. That looks nice. All right, then we're going to need a label, a couple of labels. So this will be the title. And let's go ahead and constrain this. Let's go and pin this 34 from the bottom of this image. Looks good to me. And we'll say add 1 constraint. And then we are going to center this horizontally in the container. And then let's go ahead and make this look a little bit better. So here's a design tip. When you have a black label, it's almost always going to look better if you make it a dark gray color, all right? And then let's get the font, and we're going to make this bigger. So we're going to say custom, and we're going to go to our Futura font right here. And let's go medium, and we'll bump this up to maybe 22, see how that looks. Okay, that looks okay. Let's give this a new title here. Let's say salmon salad, just so we kind of know how it's looking. I think that looks good. Let's go ahead and drop in another label for our instructions. Just gonna drop that in right here. And again, let's go ahead and pin it. And we'll make this 18 from below the label above it. Add 1 constraint. And we are going to then center it horizontally in our container. Add one constraint. Then let's go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to change the font color to our dark gray. And then we're going to change the font to a custom font and Futura. And let's try maybe a 20, just slightly smaller than the title. And I misspoke. We don't want to center this. We want to constrain it to the sides. So if you add a constraint and then you decide that you don't want it, you can come up here to the size inspector. And here are our constraints. We see here we have top space to the salmon salad label. And then we have here align center X. This is the one that we don't actually want. So I can select it, click on it, and say delete. Okay. And then what we want to do is we now need to add constraints because you can see that now it's red. So we're going to select our add new constraints, and we're going to actually pin it from the left by 20 and from the right by 20. I'm going to uncheck constrain to margins and say add to constraints. There we go. That looks better. All right, so now we're going to need IB outlets for each of these labels and image. So I'm going to open up our RecipeDetailVC in our assistant editor by holding Option and clicking on RecipeDetailVC. And there we go. Then I think we can manage without closing the document view. So I'm gonna just drop this down and make some room for our IB outlets. Gonna control and drag. This is our recipe image. That's an outlet. Then we have our label here. So I control and drag. And sometimes you may see me holding the end of this line like kind of in the middle or even above an IB outlet. And that's because I'm trying to get it to drop in below this one. So I'm not sure why, but if you see, it's kind of hard to get it right where it needs to go, but I find that often if I go a little bit above, then it actually goes below, and that's where I want it, okay? So just kind of a heads up as to why sometimes you might see me have it way up here and then have it drop in below. Okay, so I'm letting go, and we're going to call this recipe title, and this is an outlet. And then lastly, we have our instructions. So I'm selecting this label, control and drag. And this is going to be our recipe instructions. And we're going to say connect. All right, very nice. All right, I'm going to close our assistant editor, and let's come over to our recipes selection VC. So just like we did in our table view, we need to know when we have selected one of our items. And so we can get that method by typing out did select item at, and this tells the delegate that the item at the specified index path was selected. So the collection view tells the delegate, which is this view controller, when a item at a specific index path was selected. And from that, we get the index path, and we can do what we need to do. And what we want to do is we'll just start out by segueing to that second view controller. So I'm going to say perform segue with identifier, and that identifier is to recipe detail. Okay. And then the sender is self. All right, let's go ahead and run that and test it. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and let's pick a pizza. And then if we click on one of these, we should segue to the next view controller. We're not going to be passing any data or setting up anything on the other side. We're just going to see those static images and labels that we added to our storyboard. Oh, looks like we got a fail though. All right, so this should be a good teaching opportunity. Let's see what I messed up. Now, sometimes when you get these errors, this signal sigabort, and it's here in our app delegate file, people often panic because there's not a whole lot of information here. And they'll say, I'm getting an error in the app delegate. I don't know what's going on. And they'll see this error right here, and it just says terminating with uncaught exception of type NSException. Okay, so don't panic. What you need to do when you get this error is you need to scroll all the way up to the top, and up here is usually where you'll be able to find a little bit more information. And it says here that we are terminating the app due to uncaught exception and this invalid argument exception. Reason, the receiver has no segue with identifier to recipe detail. Okay, so that tells me that I messed up the spelling for this segue. Okay, so let's go see what it really is. I'm going to open up this storyboard, and if I select it, okay, so I did a I forgot what I named it. So we're actually naming it to recipe selection. That's the name of the segue. So I'm going to just copy that to make sure we get it right. And I'm gonna kind of squeeze that down a little bit and come back to our recipe selection VC and paste the correct segue identifier here and run that again. All right, choose pizza again and select one. And hey, there we go. Now we are properly segueing over and viewing our view controller. Okay, so that's all well and good, but what we need to do is pass from this view controller to the next one a recipe object corresponding to the correct one. Okay, so similarly to what we did before when we had that whole analogy of when you're in one room and you have a pizza and you want to take that pizza to another room, but that pizza can't leave that room. On the other side, we have an empty pizza box. And if we hold up our pizza to the door, then that empty pizza box will magically fill up with the same identical pizza that we had in the first room, all right? So taking that analogy, what we need to do is we need to have a way to set the value of a variable on the other side. So in our RecipeDetailVC, we first need an empty box. Okay, so I'm going to say var selected recipe. It's going to be of type recipe. Okay, and that's going to be exclamation point. And that's because here in our recipe selection VC, we have our array of recipes. And when we click on, let's see here, when we select one of them, we are going to set a variable. So that brings us back up to the top of our recipe selection VC. And we are going to need a variable recipe to pass. Okay, and this is also going to be of type recipe. And then down here in did select, we are going to set that variable recipe to pass equal to, and then we can use our index path information that we receive from our table view telling us which one was selected. We can use that to say recipe to pass is equal to recipes, and then access the one that was selected by saying index path dot item. And then now, right when we click on one of these cells, we're going to set this variable's value. Then we're going to start to segue. But before we actually do the whole segue, we are going to call prepare for segue. Okay, so this is called right before we actually move from view controller A to view controller B. Okay, so this is where we can actually set the value of our empty variable on the other side. But first we need to get a reference to the view controller on the other side. And we do that by saying if let detailsVC is equal to segue.destination. Okay, so we are getting a generic view controller that is the destination, and we need to cast that as a, let's see here, RecipeDetailVC. Okay. And now that we have the detailsVC view controller, which is the next one, we also have access to this variable so we can set the value of it. So I'm going to say detailsVC dot selected. Okay, so something is not quite right. Oh, I know why. Sometimes when you add stuff to your view controllers, it won't populate through the rest until you save it. So now that I've saved it, when we come over here, this should pop up. There we go. So detailsVC.selected recipe is equal to this value that we are setting right here, which is recipe to pass. Okay, I'm just gonna clean up a little bit here. And that should work now. So now we should be passing from our selection VC to the recipe detail VC, the selected recipe. And just a reminder that recipe contains a title, instructions, and image name. So now we can come to our recipe detail VC, and here in view did load, using the recipe that was passed, we can populate these three outlets. So we can say the recipe image dot image is equal to, and we'll create a new UI image initialized with the name of the image, and that is the selected recipe dot image name. Then we can set the title, so recipe title dot text is equal to, and that is selected recipe dot title. And then finally we can set the instructions. Recipe instructions dot text is equal to selected recipe dot instructions. All right, let's see how that works. All right, so here we go. Let's get some pasta here. And now when I click, we should be passing this recipe to our detail view controller, and then using that recipe, it will populate the image, title, and instructions. Ooh, looks interesting. We forgot to clip to bounds that image is why I'm assuming that this is happening. And our instructions look like we need to wrap the text, okay? So just a couple of minor things to fix. Coming into our storyboard, we are going to grab our image here, and we are going to say clip to bounds. And then for our instructions label here, what we need to do is right here on line break, instead of truncating it, we are going to say word wrap, okay? So what that's gonna do is, instead of, like you saw, a single line that got truncated right here, we're just going to wrap, and as much room as is needed vertically, it will just show it all, okay? So let's go ahead and run that and try again. All right, let's go ahead and click on sandwiches, and let's select this guy right here, and ooh, there we go. Something's still not right with our label. Let's check that out again. I forgot this one right here, lines, okay? So if I put this up to 2, then we would see 2 lines. If I put it up to 3, we'd see 3. But if you want it to just show as many as are needed, you actually put it to 0, okay? So let's go ahead and run that again. All right, now let's do burgers. And this one right here looks delicious. Hey, there we go. All right, so our font is a little too big. I'm gonna grab our instructions here and drop that down to 17. And let's run that again. All right, I'm gonna select salads and this one right here. And ooh, there we go. All right. So now we see our image nicely, our title, and our instructions. All right, so that's it. We have made a beautiful app where we have learned a lot. We have gone over, we started out making our data models using structs and our data set. Then we learned about table views and protocols and delegates. We learned how to make custom classes for our category cell and our recipe cell so that we are delegating the responsibility of handling the UI. We learned how to select items in a table view, how to pass data from one view controller to another, and how to use collection views, how to use its protocols. And yeah, I mean, we learned so much in this making this app. So I hope you had a lot of fun and learned a lot. If you have any questions, please leave the questions in our Q&A section, and I will do my best to answer them all right? So this has been Johnny B, and I'll see you in the next one.